So this is a video about the making of this oil painting. It's pretty big. You see my hand? And it's very textured. You can see all these little grooves of paint and cross hatching. And how I painted this was different from a lot of painting tutorials nowadays where everything is alla prima, so more like these where they're really quick. This is a layered painting. So I built the canvas by hand, and I show that. And then I did a really clean line drawing from life, and then I layered about 2 layers of paint. So in a ébauche, which is like a kind of like a transparent painting, and then you layer on top of it this texture, and it gets a really cool look. So I'm not going to show everything in this video, but I have a lot of footage, and so I figured I'd show a little bit of the process.
Group of people to impress. First, you'll need a half pound or 225 grams of thinly sliced protein. That can either be ribeye if you want to drop a little extra cash, or pork. Now immediately stir fry that aggressively for about 20 minutes. Got umami, it's sweet, it's salty, it's fatty, it's rich.
There's the omelet.
Okay.
There's the chip thing I showed you.
The chip thing I definitely want. I think that looks super good.
There's a sandwich.
So that creates more sandwich. It's a mathematical equation, trust me. And you have a...
Okay, so I'm just gonna be, if I'm looking up here, it's because the I'm like watching the video at the same time as I'm recording this. So yeah, if I'm like, that's why I'm not looking at the camera. So I start with a line drawing, and I did this painting kind of maybe 1/3 from life, and then 2/3 from photos. Maybe it might have only been even less than that, like maybe 1/4 from life. And so as the model came over and we worked on this painting, the pose would change from pose to pose because she would come over and the model and things would be in a slightly different place. And so I had a lot of trouble, particularly with the legs. And I moved them just countless times. And so this was a particular area of struggle. But anyways, the goal here wasn't to do a finished drawing, but to really focus on just the outer contour the most, was to get that as accurate as I could for the painting. And then to sort of place out where the shadows are. This drawing changes so many times throughout this process. You can see that the whole chest gets moved. And I was playing around because as the model would come over, I would prop her up in different ways. And what I didn't realize is that the orientation of the torso in space, how important that is. And if there's, you can see how much it changed from there. So you can see I was propping more pillows under her arms before, and then I realized that if I don't do that every single time, you know, it changes the whole pose. So you can see me working through these things in real time. Here I go, working over the contour of the leg. And I think if I were to do this again, one of the things I might have done would be to maybe even, I hesitate to say draw it vertically first, or I would just maybe keep flipping the canvas to see what the leg looks like from up and down, because I haven't done a whole lot of reclining poses. I feel as though generally I want to say too many, they're almost like too overdone. And a lot of artists who do them, they're not really good at drawing the figure standing up. So my purpose with this was to, well, with this particular painting, I wanted to do a good job on a reclining pose. And now that I felt like I've done more than enough of my fair share of a variety of poses and really actually learning the anatomy, that, okay, now let's draw it in the sort of classical style. So I had to cut out a little bit of footage, so there's going to be a cut here. And at this point, I've sort of locked down the contour and I'm just filling it in so that it's much cleaner, and we're about to transition here into the actual painting. So at this point, once the drawing is done, what I'll do is I'll flip the drawing over onto the back and I'll cover the entire back of it in paint. And I'm going to pause the footage here. I'll cover the entire back of it in paint. And then I'll place the drawing directly onto the canvas. So like, if like this is the canvas and this is my drawing, and the drawing's on the front, the paint goes on the back, and you just use any kind of, like, I used raw umber. It's like a brownish, yellowish paint. And then you place the drawing on the canvas where you want it, and you take a ballpoint pen and you trace over your lines. And then when you lift up, you have this clean drawing in paint on your surface that you can paint into. And you want to wait for that to dry so that if you ever wipe your painting, the drawing stays there. And this is kind of the first step in layering paint, because we've separated the drawing process from the painting process. And this is how, you know, it used to be done in like the Renaissance period, but it kind of like disappeared as of late with the boom of alla prima painting, which I still love and do just as much as this, but it's just a different way of working that I think is less utilized. And even when people do utilize it, they're still kind of just painting like one layer over a drawing, and it's still kind of just alla prima, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna keep playing from here, right at the start of the painting. So you can see that my canvas is toned gray, and so I'm starting from a middle value rather than starting from a white. And that'll let me judge my values a lot clearer. I've put down just a little bit of what I believe is raw umber as a couch. And then I'm painting into that couch. And again, this is the sort of first layer of paint. So everything is watered down heavily with a mixture of mineral spirits and then some sort of oil. You can see though, even though it's watered down, it's still already looking realistic. That's one of the things that's important in this stage, is actually you're trying to get it right. You're just trying to go lower saturation, lower chroma, lower value. Everything is closer together, and then you can work up the values in the fine, or the final layer. So I'm painting in the eye here. I'm trying to keep everything very soft. You can see I'm using a very small brush in this technique. It's very different from the sort of big brush mentality, which I also love. But it's a very different effect. It's more like drawing with a pencil. And I'm sort of cross-hatching. I'm making a deliberate, this kind of mark as I'm painting. And I'm scrubbing the paint into the surface. It gives a very different look than placing the paint and letting go, which can also be really cool, and I do that later. But so again, you see a little tiny eboche. That's what I just put down in the shadow there. And probably it's just raw umber. And so raw umber is like a warm, yellowish, brownish pigment. It's really useful. I use it. I probably wasn't using it as much on my palette as I am now. Right now, raw umber is like a huge part of my painting. I could change it with anything. It doesn't have to be raw umber, but raw umber gets you the closest to, it's basically like a super low chroma skin color. And so it's very useful for desaturating skin. basically what I would do, since I might have to skip ahead here. I'm not sure what I'm doing. Hold on. So at this point, I'm slowly crawling with the form and trying to really just paint shape by shape. And so as I go down the form, I'm thinking about the transition of light and trying to paint really, really accurately, both to what I'm seeing, but then also just thinking about the overall sense of light as it comes down the form. So now, as I go around the chest area, I'm trying to really think of a sphere. And I'm thinking about the transition as the light goes around the sphere, and thinking actually conceptually about basic shapes. And so I'm looking at my reference, but I'm also not exactly painting what I'm seeing, but more painting ideally what it is. And so I'm keeping all of my values really, really clean. And if I see any jumps of values, I'm not putting that in. I'm trying to keep the transition of my values as clean as possible. This is a different way of working than when you paint what you see and you look up at the model or your reference and you try and literally paint the shape that you're seeing. And these sort of two ways of working, I'm going to skip ahead here a bit because I've got some more dead space in the film. It's a different way of working than looking up at your reference and trying to decide what a color or a value is and then drawing exactly what you see regardless of if it makes sense or not, which is also equally important to do that. And I do that so much, and I even do it on here. It's sort of a balance between the two. I think it's kind of an interesting thing in painting because so much of painting is contradictory. Almost everybody I know has read the book Alla Prima by Richard Schmidt, and in there, he leans really heavily on painting exactly what you see. And I think that's really important too. Not because he said it, because I don't really like his art that much, but for different reasons it's really important. He's amazing, but just stylistically I'm not into that. Now here you can see me kind of going into the crevices, and I'm trying to really think about the transitions of the shapes. I'm also being conscious of the contour of the strokes. I'm thinking about following the form or going against the form. It's really just so similar to drawing with pencil, because sometimes in drawing, the form, meaning the direction of the hatching, needs to follow the form. So in the case of the chest, it's kind of going around the chest in the circular pattern. But other times, it shouldn't do that. Other times it should be some sort of rhythm. Like there's some sort of direction. If you look at any good artist in pencil, you'll see the difference between when they're drawing strokes that are sort of like, oftentimes you see those strong shadows and all the strokes are going the same direction as the shadow. Michelangelo did that. A lot of the etchers did that. You can see that in Rembrandt's work. But Rembrandt also goes crazy with the hatching. Rembrandt's probably like the best person to look at for that. Some of Rembrandt's etchings, if you pull them up right next to his paintings, you can see the direct influence between the two. Specifically, like if you look at an up-close image of a Rembrandt portrait, a highly detailed one, which from far away looks realistic, which is one of my favorite things. When from far away it looks realistic, but up close, there's all this fascinating stuff going on with the texture. So the texture of those paintings is directly related to his ability to cross-hatch in hatching. These Rembrandt etchings were done in, like, he would scrape into metal and then you, like, I don't know the technique very well. There are people who do it nowadays, but I think it's something along the lines of pressing the metal into ink, and then the sort of reverse ends up being the image. Anyways, I'll throw some stuff on the screen to show you what I'm talking about with that. But that's essentially what I'm trying to do here. Most of my training has been drawing, so it's something I'm very familiar with, and it's what I'm drawing upon when I do these sort of brush strokes. I might need to skip ahead again. There's so much dead space in this footage, I'm sorry. So here I'm working back into the values again. It's still wet paint at this point, and so it's very easy to change. One of the things that's really important is, notice I could have just rushed in and blocked in a bunch of stuff there, right along the chest. But you can see how long, even in the time lapse, that it's taking me to go around that area. That's because I'm trying really consciously to not rush and to do it correct the first time. Another popular thing online right now is the sort of trend, at least it was a few weeks ago, was just make it exist, then make it good later. Which there's truth in that. But I think what ends up happening is if we don't try and do our best the first try, and even this, I mean, right now it looks good, but like later on in the painting, this first stage gets kind of wonky in other areas, like really wonky, and I had to go over it again and again and again till I finally got it correct. But my point with that was, even when trying to get it perfect right out the gate, you end up falling short. And so I think what ends up happening to a lot of artists is that they try, they'll make something with the intent to just make it exist, and then later they'll fix it. But I think it ends up hurting them in the long run, because the mistakes build up, especially in drawing, and they build and they build and they build, and eventually it's too many things to correct. And I think you can solve that by just do it correct the first time, or try. You're going to be way closer to the goal, and it's more difficult in the moment, but it's kind of like the shape by shape painting approach, to just bit by bit by bit. You can see me going around the form of the arm and painting it just shape by shape by shape, going across. And I think this is the only way to achieve a really finished looking, highly smooth painting, rather than an approach that's more messy, which is good too. And I do that so much. And you'll even see me on the drapery use that exact approach on the drapery. So you can see me now, I'm working in a lighter value into this arm where it's already painted, and I'm trying to work out the form, because that highlight on the arm is basically a cylinder, and the highlight, which it's more in the middle in the reference, but it's indicating where the corner is. Highlights happen on corners. If you look at like a white tube of paint, you can see it on the other arm too that I'm painting right now. You can see the highlight going down this spot. But the highlight always indicates a change in plane. You can see how here the highlight is telling me where the corner is. The highlight here tells me where that edge is. It's harder to think about that on something that's round. We don't really think about it, but highlights exist on corners. That's why there's a highlight on the tip of the nose. Well, there's not in this lighting. It's a very subtle one. It's right there. But highlights should never be put in quick, because they tell you about the form of an object. They're where two planes meet. So if on the arm, her arm's like this, it's where this plane and this plane meet. Right now there's a shadow, so the shadow tells you a corner as well. But the highlight tells you another corner. It's telling you the meeting of these two planes. So the last little part here that I recorded was just doing the drapery. And you can see how I'm totally changing the approach that I'm painting here. I'm getting out a much bigger brush, and I'm focusing on painting big shapes, painting what I see, and just in a different style. And the reason being that when you paint different objects in a painting, if they're painted in a slightly different manner, it has a really beautiful textural look. And so I'm using a big flat brush, changing the technique of how I'm painting. And that contrast between the very tightly knit, ornate skin painting mixed with this juicy, chunky brush strokes on the drapery has a really cool look juxtaposed with each other. Because in real life, one of the things we notice is how different skin looks from drapery. And so if we can emulate that by changing the method of what we're painting, the contrast between how the two things are painted creates this sort of vibrancy. And one of the other things I did is that the drapery is not painted texturally. I'm painting it very flat. Alla prima, one layer, no multiple layers. It's colorful, it's red, it's just totally different. And then the skin, if you go back to the beginning of the video and see the finished painting, or I'll put it side by side, the difference between the texture on the two, I think, has a unique look. It's kind of like seeing a fuzzy coat or something. The fuzziness of the coat contrasts with, you know, Cruella de Vil's wrinkly skin, or whoever's wearing it. I don't know. I'm trying to think of people wearing fuzzy fur coats, and all I can think of is that movie. Anyways. Trying to be really careful to contour the hand, leaving space for it. And then once the drapery's in, it's not done. In the same session, I'm gonna go over it. Not a second layer, just painting wet into wet, again, alla prima, and sort of just trying to get the roundness, show the overall dark to light. The drapery is essentially, again, a big cylinder wrapped around the person. And so the same sort of light to dark, even if the whole thing is dark, applies. And so I'm trying to get that darkness under, and you can see the sort of highlight, lighter shape, and it gets a glow to it. In layered painting, you could separate those out, so you could paint the one first and then paint the highlights over it. But if it's more alla prima like this, you do it all in one session. Creates a different look, very good look, just different look. I think a fly just went by the camera. It's really gross. So I'm just working into these folds. That fly. Sorry. Wow, that's really distracting. Anyways. So then, again, I'm putting dark on the top so that you get this real roundness. And there's just the light, just a little bit in the middle. I'm trying really hard to ignore the fly. Again, trying to keep the brush strokes. In this instance, I'm placing a brush stroke and leaving it so that the brush stroke is kind of clear and reads on its own and it's not blended. Trying to consciously be different from the rest of the painting. Anyways, I think that's just about it. So, I hope you got something out of this. I've got a lot of footage of this painting. I don't know if I'm going to do another video on it. I just wanted to do one showing off because I've posted this video on a few different social medias and had to remove it because of their guidelines. So I kind of felt like I should do a YouTube video of it because I might be able to actually show it off a bit, talk about the process, and also talk about something that a lot of art teachers don't really talk about, which is layering paint. I feel like it's a little uneven on the teaching side. So many people are alla prima. So I felt like this kind of like fulfills a niche that some people aren't really discussing. And in addition, just figurative art, I feel like there's not a whole lot of good teachers on it. Maybe a lot of people drawing, not so much painting. And even then, there's a lot of information online and not a lot of it is good. And so the next couple of videos, I keep thinking about making a figurative video where I discuss just drawing and how to approach drawing figures. I think that would be something that would help a lot of people out. So anyways, look forward to that, and I'll catch you next time.